Hello people, and welcome back to the channel for another Final Fantasy video. Today I'm going to be taking you through all of what you need to know about magic, or green materia, in Final Fantasy VII Remake. This will be especially useful for those of you who are completely new to the franchise, since the game doesn't actually do a very good job of explaining what some of the more advanced magic actually does. So I'm here to tell you. Remember to drop a like and subscribe if you want to see more Final Fantasy VII Remake content, and without further ado, let's get into it. Firstly, we'll start with attack magic. These are your bread and butter spells, and other than Cura, are the ones you're likely to use most often. There are 4 types of elemental attack magic. Fire, lightning, ice, and wind magic. The first thing to know is that when you use materia regularly, it will level up to a more powerful version of the spell available, but this will also require more MP to use. All of these spells have 3 forms and work essentially the same way, the third level being a devastating elemental attack. These spells simply serve to deal damage. There are no side effects to these spells like in many other games such as burning or frozen statuses, so they are most effective when used against enemies weak to certain elements. Resistances also work in the way you would expect them to. Enemies using ice magic tend to be weak to fire, those using fire weak to ice magic, machines are generally weak to lightning, and flying enemies are weak to air magic. The best way to discover weaknesses and resistances is simply to assess enemies as often as you can. You'll get an idea over time about what works on who without having to assess everyone first. But it's best to do this in the early game and make life easier for yourself. Healing magic is the next type of materia you're going to come into contact with in the game. It basically serves as an alternative to using potions or high potions, and although early on it might not recover a huge amount of hit points, over time, once it unlocks, it becomes an incredibly powerful tool for saving you when you're in the most trouble. Healing materia has 4 forms: Cure, Cura, Regana, and Curaga. Regana is the only one different here, as it heals you over time. The other spells work exactly like attack magic, the next one being a more powerful version of the last. Another type of support materia is status healers. These are Poisana, Esuna, and Resist, and then Raise and Arise materia. Both of these materia come in extremely handy in a tight situation, and specifically deal with debuffs that have been placed upon you by an enemy. Poisana works just like an antidote and cures poison. Esuna cures all status effects, and Resist, which is particularly powerful, prevents any debuffs from being cast on an ally, making it extremely useful when you're against an opponent who uses a lot of debuffs and magic attacks upon you. Raise and Arise basically do what they say on the tin. They're just a magical version of Phoenix Down, with Arise in particular bringing you back with a significant amount of HP. The most important thing about all the magic discussed so far is that they are all more effective the higher the magic stats of the person using them is, so always bear that in mind, especially when thinking about cure magic, as a supportive ally who can restore a huge amount of hit points will come in super handy later on in the game when things get really tough.
Gotta be careful.
The 4th type of materia you'll come into contact with is protection materia. This is Barrier, Mana Ward, and Mana Wall. All of these basically act as protective shields, boosting stats for either defense or spirit. Barrier halves physical damage, Mana Ward halves spell damage received, and Mana Wall halves magic and physical damage, effectively being a combination of the first 2 spells. This spell is super useful for obvious reasons, most especially for casting on a ranged ally like Aerith or Barret, who tend to have either low defense or spirit stats, to guard them against powerful enemies while they do their business uninterrupted from a distance. Status changing materia, such as buffs for your allies or debuffs for your enemies, is where the game gets really tactical. Usually, these are spells you would cast on enemies, with the exception of Berserk, to to undermine them and deal damage. While these spells usually work on a wide variety of opponents, it's best to assess them first, especially as many stronger enemies have immunities to lots of status ailments. It is also possible to cast status changes on enemies and for the spell not to register, so make sure the characters you equip them to have high magic stats for maximum effectiveness. Bio does what it says on the tin. It inflicts poison status on enemies with incrementally taking away health points, with each form of bio being stronger than the last, just like the attack magic. It's an incredibly useful spell, and definitely worth equipping to a character early on and leveling it up. It can come in real handy. Just like the attack magic, some enemies will have natural resistances to poison, such as creatures using poison themselves, so just be careful. Binding Materia works differently in that each version of this magic is different from the last. Sleep, well, puts enemies to sleep, immobilizing them to attack. Beware, however, that usually enemies will wake up if attacked while sleeping, so the spell is most effective in a group where you want to isolate the most powerful opponent while you clean up the rest. Silence prevents spell casting. If an enemy is particularly troublesome with casting spells on you, then Silence works really well for nullifying their abilities and focus just on their physical attacks. Unlike Sleep, Silence is a timed spell, so it will only be dispelled if the enemy has an item to cure themselves. Be wary that although Silence will prevent spell casting, it will not stop special attacks that have side effects of casting spells on you, such as smog attacks from certain enemies. I found it most useful against enemies that have naturally high defenses, such as the Sahagen Prince, who is extremely resistant to physical damage. Lastly, Berserk is a very particular spell and should be used with tactical caution. The spell effectively changes yours or your enemy's defense stat for a higher attack stat. As a result, more damage will be dealt, but it will also be received, making it a very powerful spell, but one that, if used incorrectly, can backfire. If you're casting on an ally, the best time to use it would be when your party is near full health. That way, if you cast it on one of your allies, I tend to prefer Tifa, to boost her attack even more, the loss of health won't be felt as badly. A combination with Barrett's lifesaver ability, so he absorbs the damage, will nullify the result of Tifa's lower defense. When casting on an enemy, it's really your choice. If you want to make a battle more exciting, then go for it, but my advice would be to isolate an enemy that really doesn't do too much damage, but you're finding really hard to break down, so open up their defenses. Time magic is super straightforward. Haste, which would usually be cast on an ally, increases the rate at which the ATB Gorge fills, making it extremely useful for inflicting huge amounts of damage with character abilities, particularly for those abilities that require 2 ATB units to use, such as Prey, Barrett's maximum damage, or Cloud's Infinity's End. Slow does the exact opposite, and hence would be cast on enemies. It lengthens the time for the ATB Gorge to fill, and therefore making it harder to use abilities and powerful spells regularly. It tends to be effective on a wide variety of opponents, and is super handy when facing those creatures that rely on non-physical attacks. Stop essentially stops an enemies in their tracks, immobilizing them completely, and unlike Sleep, hitting the target won't break the spell, making it incredibly powerful. Like Silence, it is a timed spell, meaning the more powerful the person casting it, the longer the recipient will be frozen in time for. Finally, we have Subversion Materia, which basically removes all stat buffs caused by spells. Breach removes barrier and mana ward effects, while Dispel simply removes all status buffs on a target. This is an incredibly useful spell for opponents that are capable of protecting them either themselves or supporting allies. It requires more usage than other materia to max out, so use it as regularly as you can, especially as equipping this materia in a paired slot with blue warding materia grants resistance to instant death attacks, which you'll appreciate when the time comes. And that's all we have, guys. That's all the basic magic in Final Fantasy VII and its basic usage. I hope you found this video super useful. Remember to drop a like and subscribe if you liked our content, and stay tuned for more videos in the next couple of weeks. See you on the next one.